Hello, friends. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are here back again this week for another round of OAuth Happy Hour. I'm Aaron Parecki, and we've got Micah Silverman here as well.
Hey, everybody.
So yeah, been a lot of fun. A fun last couple of weeks. We took last week off. We're going to switch to our new bi-weekly schedule for these. But that means there's been a lot of stuff going on to catch up on. So should be a fun conversation today. So if you were around last week in this world, you will have known that there was the OAuth Security Workshop, which normally is an in-person event, and we were really looking forward to going to Norway, but that was not in the cards for this year. So the event was entirely virtual, um, which actually went surprisingly well, despite it being an entirely virtual event. I think it was great to have a lot more people able to join who wouldn't have otherwise been able to travel there. And the conversations were still great. So, overall it went very well. So we're gonna do a little recap of our experiences there. We both attended and presented and had a lot of good discussions and share some other OAuth news that's new this week.
Sounds
So
good.
yeah, um, I guess we should start with the news as of this morning. The big news is that OAuth 2.1 draft that myself and Dick and Torsten have been working on has now officially been adopted as a working group draft. So that was previously a individual draft, which means it had uh, no official standing in the group, and that's what you see when you see like someone's name in the URL. Um, but it is now officially a working group draft, so the URL has changed and it is now IETF. I thought this would autocomplete in my browser. There it is. So now it's that's no, that's OAuth. That's just the OAuth draft. Um, I need to update the link on this website to link to the new version. So I'll dig it up in a second. But yeah, anyway, the there's been no changes in the text between last week and now that it being adopted. It just means that it is now officially on the books as something the group has decided to work on, and this is the starting point for it. So yeah, that's the news there. It's mostly just a process update, really. There's no like functional changes here, but that's how this stuff goes.
Still exciting. It's down the. It's another down the path of getting there. Another hurdle has been met.
Yeah, exactly.
What does it take to
So
actually get that adopted? Is it a vote? I've never seen that actual process in action.
yeah, good question. So the process is um, some anybody can turn up and write a draft, an individual draft is what it's called. And then you go and find the working group that it's most appropriate for. In this case, obviously the OAuth working group. And eventually, once you socialize it around, usually present it as an individual draft at one or two of the meetings. Um, then there's a call on the mailing list. So the official adoption happens on the mailing list. So there was an email that went out I think a couple of weeks ago. I don't actually remember the date that the first call went out. But yeah, once it's on the mailing list, that's where you get the on the record comments. And hopefully at that point you're just getting +1 comments because everyone's already familiar with it and knows what's in it and knows your goal with it. But if you try to bring something up too early, then you might get some pushback and have to go back and revise it before it's agreed to be a working group draft. But yeah, so this was pretty straightforward. The call was entire the mailing list replies were entirely +1s. A little bit of discussion about like people had some feedback on the wording or diagrams, but um, that was not the place for that comment. That's a different discussion. So nobody had any issues with adopting it as a working group draft. So that's really what it's for. It's like if someone has a problem with the idea of the group spending collective time working on it, that's the time to object.
Right.
Um, yeah. So yeah, so this is now something that is official, and we keep working on it. So it's not done at all. We now are ready to talk about the details of what's in it and the text, what it includes, all that good stuff. So looking forward to more work on this. Thank you. You found a
Nice.
link. um, yeah, and like I said, there's no text difference from in this draft compared to what we have been talking about the last time we met. It's just moved over to the new URL.
So it's got a revision of 00, and now your name is out of it, and the IETF is in because it's official.
Exactly. Yep.
Neat.
Yeah. So that's great. Great news. Looking forward to more continued discussions on that.
I'm sure there will be.
Oh, yes. But again, I do want to just reiterate that the goal of this draft is not to add things to OAuth 2. It is meant to be a consolidation of everything that already is in OAuth 2. So you're not going to see new features added here that unless they're already described in something like the security best current practice or um, other extensions that are already stable.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and if you're watching this live, let us know if you have any questions in the comments about this draft or the process or anything about OAuth really. Yeah, so let's chat about the workshop. So
Yeah.
this was my first time going to an OAuth security workshop, and I believe yours as well, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. What did you think of it?
I would have loved to have been there in person, of course, but I thought they did a really good job remotely. GoToMeeting is not my favorite, but it worked. It was fine.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think it did. I think there were uh, a diverse group of people there that maybe wouldn't have been able to make it if it was in person. So pros and cons.
Yeah.
But it was good. A lot of good sessions. I liked. It's only the second time that I've gone to a conference that is an unconference or has an unconference component, and I'm liking that format more and more. It kind of
Yeah, it's
the
really
first time I
it's
experienced it, it kind of freaked me out a little, but I got used to it.
yeah, exactly. So the first, actually, I didn't go to the first day. The first day was workshop day, and there were a couple of
Yeah,
workshops
same.
people led. I didn't attend that, but so I started on the second day, which was the talk day, and that was
Yeah,
pre-scheduled, pre-planned talks, people presenting their work. So I did two talks there about the two drafts I'm working on, OAuth 2.1 and the browser-based apps, and there were a handful of other excellent talks as well. But then the other 2 days, the last 2 days, day 3 and 4, were the unconference days. And if you're not familiar with an unconference, the idea is that there is no schedule until the morning of that day. So the beginning of that day, not wasn't morning for everybody. Um, so I'm on the West Coast, so I was getting up at 5 a.m. to get on the GoToMeeting and do session proposals. So you start out by everybody deciding what they want to talk about, proposing sessions. In this case, it was all done online, of course, so everybody was like type up their description. When it's in person, usually you like get up in front of people and explain what your session is going to be about, and that's how they get proposed. But it actually worked out great having it all be online. Um, and then the organizers go and build the schedule, negotiating with who's going to be presenting and trying to make sure things don't conflict. There were only two tracks. Sometimes bigger events will do 3 or 4 different concurrent rooms, um, but it was just the two tracks, and yeah. So every day we did that process again. So we had no idea what the day was going to bring until the beginning of that day. Um,
Just as an aside, it was kind of a funny experience for me because I pitched this idea to talk about. I had no intention of doing that originally. I was just going to attend this conference, and I put in the comments that I had another scheduled talk that same day. So, just around this particular time frame, if my proposed talk got picked up, we couldn't do it around that particular time frame. And then they were like, okay, you're going to be first. And
yeah.
that was 8 a.m. my time, which is not that early, but I'd been up super late the night before. And while we were going through the whole, voting process, I was literally still in bed. And then they were like, all right, Micah, you're up in 15 minutes. So I had to
Oh,
scramble a little bit, but it went well.
well, yeah. No, nobody can tell once you're, in front of this blue screen. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that worked well. That went well. So that was so you presented the demo of the authorization code injection attack that we've been talking about on this stream quite a bit now. Um,
Yeah.
and I think they went really well. I think people understood what the problem was and got something out of it.
Yeah, and I was personally pleased because a bunch of people had ideas and answered the question, which has come up a bunch, like how would you do this without a malicious browser plugin? Because that's kind of like cheating in a big way, which is, that feedback is fair enough, but this was kind of the practical application that I came up with. But I've been very curious also, like how would you go about doing this without a browser plugin? And there were some great ideas, and I think it's goes along with the unconference style. It was much more of a conversation than like I'm going to present this talk and you're going to watch it. There was a lot of back and forth, which I appreciated.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's one of the other really important aspects of the unconference days as opposed to the first scheduled talks, which is that the unconference sessions are not supposed to be presentations. They're like explicitly not supposed to be just you talking at people the whole time. They're meant to be discussions. So usually somebody will come in with like there's usually a facilitator, I guess. So that doesn't usually mean slides. It usually just means someone who's there to guide the discussion. But it is definitely meant to be a discussion. And that's what I really like about that format of an event.
Yeah. Yeah, it was nice. I took a chunk out of my usual presentation, just a few slides, kind of a diagram overview of what it was,
Hmm.
a demo of it, and then the rest was conversation. So it was pretty
Hmm.
cool.
It's very cool. And those are all recorded too. So one of the other benefits of doing this all virtually is that the recordings turn out a lot better than than you get when they're in person. So they'll be up on YouTube soon. I know the workshop videos just got posted today or yesterday. So the other
Yeah.
days will be coming out very soon, with any luck.
Yeah, and I will say one of the benefits of the remote nature of it all was I was speaking at a Java meetup in Ukraine later on that day. So I was tuning into and participating in this conference in Norway while later on in the day speaking at somewhere else in Ukraine. It's pretty
Yep.
sweet that we can do that these days.
We're just teleporting now. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
I will say I do miss traveling and I do miss getting on
sure.
planes and airports now officially. Like I finally hit that point. But it is also nice um, to be able to just teleport to random locations instantly now. So
Yeah.
it's cool.
How did your scheduled talks and your on conference talks go?
Good. So the I did a talk about the browser-based app draft, which I've been working on for a long time now. I didn't actually realize how long it's been, um,
Hmm.
but it's been a while. It's been in progress for a while now. I think end of 2018 is when we started it. Um, and I sort of presented the current state of it and some of the challenges I had been facing with it. Um, One of the things that happened between the time of starting it and now is that browsers have decided to make a huge change to their cross-origin cookie policy. So, if you iframe in another site, the cookies don't get shared with that anymore, which is a great thing from a privacy perspective because that's how a lot of ad trackers work and all that. But that's also how OpenID Connect does silent refresh of tokens, right? So that's essentially not going to work anymore. And that's something now that the browser-based app draft should address, and that wasn't even on the radar when we had started it. So we really need to figure out, what is the best practice given these new constraints. But it was a good presentation. I ended up um, talking about it for way longer than I expected. I thought I was going to only have like 2 minutes on it.
Oh,
So that
wow.
was fine. But then also, it ended up sparking a lot of good questions, and we had 2 days. Like we had an unconference session about it for both other days because there was just
Hmm.
so much to talk about it. People had a lot of good ideas, and um, the discussions are still ongoing from that. Um,
What are some of the highlights out of, like where you're going with the draft and the discussions that you had?
well, so the conference had a Slack, of course, as well. So there was a lot of good discussions in that channel, and the everybody's very supportive of this document existing. So that was nice to hear because working up for so long, it's hard to sometimes keep motivated. But got a lot of good feedback that people appreciate that the draft exists and have actually gotten utility out of it, even though it's not done yet. Um, and we have a list of a handful of things that we're going to try to make sure get added to it in order to sort of address some, of these new things that have changed. And uh, yeah, so we're
Is
gonna
there
keep
going to
making
be
progress on it.
yeah, is there going to be a separate version for OAuth 2.1, or does it just kind of naturally dovetail with OAuth 2.1 as it's evolving?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is actually meant to be one of the input documents into 2.1. So OAuth 2.1 is meant to roll up all of the sort of core OAuth 2 drafts. So that's going to be, you've got like um, obviously the core document, bearer tokens, the native apps best current practice, and this is the sort of counter to, not counter, companion to the native apps best current practice, but for browser-based apps. So it's meant to include this, um, which is a little bit weird because technically this is still in progress, but the concepts in it aren't defining any new behavior really. So it's meant to also any of the behavior really that this spec does define is actually defined in the security best current practice. So that's also an input into 2.1. So 2.1 is rolling all of these up. So
So this will end
anything
up
that
being
this
a section in 2.1. Yeah,
exactly. So in 2.1 right now, there's a section for native apps, and there's actually a placeholder for this document. It's like
right.
it's like to do, bring in all the best current practice, the browser-based best current practice stuff into the section. It
Right.
probably won't actually say that much because when this is a standalone draft, you kind of have to like set the context for why you're reading this draft. So there's a lot of background and like references out to other things. So that'll all get stripped out and it'll just be a couple of the core points that it makes being brought in to 2.1.
Yeah. We have a question that relates, I think, to the 2.1 draft,
Mm-hmm.
which is, does the draft affect the process of integrating with the Okta integration network? Um, I think the quick answer to that would be no. They kind of operate independently. When OAuth 2.1 is closer to release, I would imagine Okta would get more serious about supporting that. But even so, that's kind of a core function as opposed to the OIN or the Okta integration network, which is very specific to Okta. That's not about necessarily about standards. It's just, various applications and how those applications communicate can integrate with Okta by providing an OIN connector. But OAuth is like a core feature of Okta, so it'll be more aligned with, at some point Okta's going to announce that they're now supporting OAuth 2.1, but they're kind of separate concerns.
Yeah. Well, and the other part of that situation though is that again, OAuth 2.1 isn't really defining new behavior. It's collecting all of the best behavior as defined by existing documents. So
Right.
if you are implementing OAuth 2 in the current recommended way by following native apps best current practice, the security best current practice, bearer tokens, all the extensions, you're already OAuth 2.1. Like that is what
Right.
OAuth 2.1 is. So
Yeah.
it's not like you're gonna have to make a bunch of changes to your apps or OAuth servers to be OAuth 2.1 compliant because OAuth 2.1 just means best way to do OAuth 2.
Right. So I imagine, I don't have any insight into this, but I imagine there will come a time when Okta retires the ability to even choose implicit flow. I hope I'm around
Right.
to see that, but that's
Yeah.
not the case right now. So, when that happens, Okta would kind of slide into being OAuth 2.1 compliant.
Yeah, exactly. So the implicit flow is not in OAuth 2.1 because it's taken out by the security best current practice. Of course, Okta still supports it because it's, trying to support the widest range of clients, and it has been the recommendation for a very long time. So there are a lot of deployed clients that are using it, even if it's not the best way to do it. But yeah, at some point, I would love to see that completely dropped. But at least in the
Yeah.
meantime, it's no longer the default. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, that is an improvement. And in fairness, I don't know of a provider yet that has actually completely removed that. I know for sure you can still uh, use implicit with Google, with Okta, with Auth0, but they
Some
all
never
in
supported it in
various
the first
ways.
place.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
GitHub, for example, they looked at it and they
Right.
were like, this is not secure. We're just not even going to build it.
Smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that day will come, but it was a we took some ground in at least not having it be the default.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, now when you go make an app in Okta, the defaults are the secure way. So that's good. I'm happy about that.
Yep,
Um,
indeed.
yeah. So what else happened at the workshop? There is there was single page apps. There was OAuth 2.1. Oh, another one of the talks on the first day or like a second day was the app to app OAuth, which I thought was a really interesting problem. So that was primarily driven from the banking world. So the idea is if you have like your bank's app installed on your phone, and then you have like some other app that wants to go and ask you like, hey, can we, pay this person through your bank? Um, you can imagine that's very well set up to be an OAuth flow, right? Where you don't want to give your bank account information to the person you're paying. You don't want to give your bank credentials to the app. So you want to use OAuth as the intermediary so that you can, you know, go to your bank and authorize your bank to pay this person. Um, so on the web, that's a straightforward OAuth exchange and fine, right? On mobile, it's a little different because on mobile, the process of using a web-based OAuth redirect thing is, not as good as in a web browser where you're already in the browser. It does pop up the little in-app browser. I still think it's, the best option available on mobile. And that is the most secure option, but it's a fact that it is a different experience than it's like native apps. So the idea is app to app OAuth basically turns the bank's mobile app into the authorization server. So you can imagine that you're in one app on your phone. Instead of that popping up a browser within the app to your bank's OAuth server, instead it redirects you to the bank's app and it launches the bank's native app. And then that's where the OAuth prompt will appear, where you then can, agree to the amount or whatever, and then you get redirected back to the app. So using the bank's own mobile app as the authorization server has some really interesting implications. And what's I think really interesting about it is that from the sort of like flow and protocol and URL aspect of that, it's almost identical. Like nothing actually really changes there because you're in one app, you just launch a URL, which happens to be a bank's app URL instead of a web page, and uh, handle the redirect still. So it's all the same from the protocol aspect. What's very different is the security aspect, which I think is why it was brought up in the security workshop. So it gets a little bit hairy when you're talking about how do you know if you actually launched the real app or an attacker's fake app that they're impersonating the bank's app, right? So that's where the discussion got really interesting and really in the weeds of like, how do we deal with this? Like this is the problem. Um,
Yeah.
and
And it ended up being an unconference talk or
yeah,
continued conversation also. So there was a lot of interest in it.
yeah, totally. It was a lot of good discussions, and I will admit I did not uh, fully follow all of those discussions because a lot of that was just like that's not a problem that I typically deal with because I don't have often that situation where I'm trying to have a native app be an OAuth server. But it was really interesting.
What I found particularly interesting about it is it kind of, in a way, it kind of mimics what we're trying to accomplish with WebAuthn, where you have a device that has a private key on it that never leaves your possession. It never goes to another server. It's never passed over the wire. So here you have a process where you're validating that an app should have access to something without having to send anything over the wire again. You've already, done what you had to do with your banking app to establish that uh, authentication and authorization, but now there's all this interaction that's just happening. It's like a little skirmish that's happening right on your phone, but you're not reaching out to authorization servers or anything else over the wire. So it's a different set of concerns, but what interested me is that it's all happening on that device.
Hmm. Yeah, and presumably the bank's app would be calling back to their web server to for some parts of that. But yeah, most of the communication is just on the device.
Yeah. And it may depend on, the nature of the transaction that you were trying to do and, you know,
Hmm.
how long since you'd last been in your banking app or something like that. There might be a bunch of deterministic kind of checks to do, but it's definitely an interesting concept.
Yeah, for sure.
And I didn't fully understand like the mechanics of the security either. I'm sure there's a lot of considerations, not the least of which is, similar to like a malicious browser extension. How do you know
Mhm.
that you're dealing with the right app, or how does one app know that it's dealing with the right app if they're communicating between each other on your device?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was an interesting one. That ended up being an unconference session, and I'm I'll probably end up going back and watching the recording of that because that was it was an interesting discussion. I'm curious to follow that work.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else? There was a session, unconference session about one of the other extensions that's in the works called rich authorization requests. Also in the banking space. So it's not just for banking, but that's a very uh, applicable use of it. The idea with rich authorization requests is to communicate more specifically about what the app is requesting than just a scope. So the scope might be like, hey, this app is trying to upload photos or read your email or send email for you. But if you wanted to be able to authorize a more fine-grained action, like uh, this app is trying to send $2 to this person from this account, then scope doesn't help you with that really. Um, so this is a way to structure that request and a syntax for that and all that. And that one I believe is already a working group document. I double check on that. But yeah, it was some good discussions on that one as well. I'm excited for that because I think that's going to open up a lot of really cool interactions. Oh no, it's not a working
Hmm.
group draft yet. Yeah, okay. So there's
Is it
still more work
an
to do there.
individual draft?
Yep.
Yeah.
Um, what else? There was, at the end of the second day, I ran a discussion about WebID, which is a proposal from Google to put the browser in control of um, it's not an OAuth thing at all. But it's about doing login on the web, and basically it makes the browser the intermediary that's negotiating all the interactions. So um, they're really coming at it from the perspective of wanting to protect user privacy. So and that's something that like OAuth gets halfway there as is, but one of the things that they're trying to protect that OAuth doesn't solve right now is they don't even want the authorization server to know what app you're logging into until after you've agreed, right? So
Hmm.
right now the authorization server is the thing that manages access to whether you can log into an app or in the public OAuth world, like Google's the OAuth server. You're gonna go log into like StreamYard, right? We're broadcasting this on StreamYard, and we have to authorize
Right.
YouTube to we have to get StreamYard an access token from YouTube. At the point that we get that I start the login, I go to Google. Google knows what app I'm trying to log into, and then I approve it, right? So that effectively leaks information before the user has agreed to it, right? So
Hmm.
the idea is to put the
Right.
browser in the middle so that the browser can get the user's permission to even tell the server what app you're logging into to then actually go and log you in, um,
Huh.
which is
The
cool.
chicken
I
and egg
like,
thing.
yeah, and it's only possible if the browser cooperates in it. Um,
Right.
but the idea is to have like effectively the consent screen, the OAuth consent screen appear within the browser. So they are working on a proposal. They wrote something up, and they have they're definitely targeting the public OAuth server use case of like the big Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And I want to make sure that we can also use it for the case where you are creating your own OAuth server, where you're bringing your own OAuth server, and it's not just the big public ones, right? So
Hmm.
I wanted to discuss that with people and make sure that we get that on the OAuth group's radar. So I thought that was again a good discussion. And actually, halfway through, or a little more than halfway through that discussion, the author of that draft of that actually came and joined the call. So
Oh
we got a
wow.
chance to ask him questions directly. So that was cool.
Nice. Yeah, I missed that one. I'll have to watch the video of it.
Yeah, that was a fun one. We ended up going
Yeah.
way late on that because it was just there was too much stuff to talk about, and then Sam joined the call towards the end, so we just like bumped it out into the. We ran way over our hour allocated, but it was fine because the closing remarks were pretty short.
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, over the years, we've had good success when we're talking about technology that's implemented at the browser level. We had cookies, they were kind of insecure. Then we had HTTP only cookies. It's only because the browser respects that
Right.
and doesn't allow JavaScript access to it that we get the benefit of that. So, that's at the browser level.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's cool to have the browsers cooperating more in this flow. I think it'd be a great thing to have browsers cooperate and actually be like a first class citizen in the identity space. Because up until now, we've always essentially had to just work around it and treat the browser
Right.
as just a pipe to move data through. Like that was, one of the main problems with the implicit flow is that we have to treat the browser as just move data from here to there and hope it does it right. And we could never really tell. So
Right.
if we actually get the browser to like be one of the roles that actually is aware of the protocol, then there's a lot more possibilities.
Yeah, it sounds like that would go a long way to reducing or eliminating the front channel requirement in a lot
Yeah, it
of
completely changes
types
the
of
model
flows.
because the front channel is no longer the reason the front channel is the problem is because we can't rely on it actually doing what we're asking it, right? It's like handing a letter off to somebody to ask them to deliver it, and you don't really can't really ever tell if they're going to do it, right?
Right.
And you get no confirmation if they actually did. Um, so with the browser more involved in the protocol, that completely changes.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah. Let's see this question from Sean, and Sean was also at the security workshop. So it was nice to get a chance to chat in person. In person. Um, just saw in the draft that client credentials shouldn't give a refresh token. One reason refresh tokens could be useful is if authentication is expensive due to hash iterations. Um, so I'm actually a little bit confused because, well, I think I know what's happening. I found the draft here, and this is the client credentials section in where is it? 4.2 client credentials grant, and it talks about well, it's the same OAuth 2 client credentials grant. Actually, I think very little of this text actually changed from OAuth 2. But the response, the example response, does not show a refresh token. I don't think there's anything in here that actually says you can't. I guess it says you shouldn't, but there's nothing saying you can't. Um, I think the reason that it says, I actually don't know why it says it should not be, but that's not anything new. Like we didn't add that in. So this is just straight from OAuth 2. Um, And I agree that there are times when it might make sense to issue a refresh token. Um, but if there are, then it's a should. So you can do it anyway. Should just means don't do it unless you know why you're doing it. Right. So like have a good reason to do it before you're going to break a should or should not. Um, so yeah, it definitely can if it makes your life easier. But the if you do issue a refresh token to a confidential client that has a client secret, that refresh token will you will have to still use the client secret to use that refresh token. Right. So that is something that the spec does say, um, which is if the application has credentials, then the app has to use the credentials. So you're not going to avoid the need for checking that secret even with the refresh token. And I think that's probably why it says the refresh token shouldn't be issued, because it doesn't really gain you anything by using it. But yeah, you definitely would not want to use the refresh token instead of the client secret. That is disallowed.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious why, in 2.0 it was optional at all. If you don't really like, what are the use cases where it would be useful? You have to you have to make a request. You have to include the client secret. So what's the benefit of using a refresh token to get a new access token as opposed to just making a new access token request in client credentials flow?
I could see something about keeping track of the like tree of tokens. So if you ask for a token with just a client ID and client secret, then that's like starting a new tree, right? And then every time you get a refresh token and you use that to get a new access token, it's attached to that tree and it's part of the same
I
chain.
see. Right.
And this is actually really important with public clients because if you can detect that anything in that chain has been leaked, you can disable the entire chain, right? So any refresh tokens or access tokens issued in response to that without affecting the rest of the access tokens that were issued from a different grant, like different instance. And
Right.
that's definitely more relevant to public clients, but I guess I could see some cases where you might want that for confidential clients as well. Like let's say you've actually got a bunch of different instances of your application spun up on Amazon servers, and they're confidential clients because it's your code base running in your infrastructure, but you have multiple machines running, right? And they're all using the same client secret because they are all the same app. They're just copies of that app.
Right.
If each of them uses just the client secret, they get their own access token. And then if this one uses a refresh token, the authorization server knows that this new access token is issued to just this machine.
Hmm.
So if this one disappears, goes offline, or is somehow something goes wrong with it, the authorization server could shut down all access tokens and refresh tokens issued to just this one without affecting the rest of the copies of the clients.
Interesting.
Yeah, and like I don't know how useful that actually is or exactly what security properties that gives you, but that is the closest I could get to a real world example of actually using that information.
Yeah, no, that's good, especially off the top of your head. I could see, you would have a different kind of audit trail if you're using the
Yeah.
refresh token each time to get a new access token. Then if you're just hitting the token endpoint with the client ID and secret to just fetch an access token straight.
Yeah, if you only use the client ID and secret, then every request looks the same, and you lose any ability to link them together with anything else.
Yeah, cool.
So could be useful. Um,
Yeah,
but again, it's not a must not in the spec; it's just a should not. So if you have a reason
yeah.
to issue a refresh token, you absolutely can. Yeah, cool. Um, what else? What else caught your ear during the workshop?
See, I was just looking over the different
There were a couple sessions
sessions
that
I
I
went
didn't
to.
go to. It sounded interesting. Um,
Yeah, I have on my list to watch the hybrid application authorization code flow extensions session. I didn't make that one, but the title of it caught my interest. I haven't seen it yet.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'm looking through. I feel like there was something else that happened within the last 2 weeks because it's been 2 weeks now since we've
Yes.
chatted.
Yep.
Um, security workshop was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Tuesday through Friday last week. But what happened earlier that week? I thought wasn't there something like wasn't there like a wasn't there a hack or something? There's always
Let's
a
see.
hack.
Yes. Oh yeah, we were talking about it. What was that? And I have to start like writing these things down
I
for
know.
the happy hour now that we're every other week.
Yeah. Oh, I totally don't remember what it was.
I'm gonna find it because we had a long
Yeah.
conversation about it.
Sean says the Twitter hack. Oh my God.
I think we talked about that at the week before. We
We
talked
did.
about the
You're right.
Twitter
Yeah,
hack at the last OAuth happy hour.
we did.
So maybe that's what we're thinking of.
And it just happened. That's what it was, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It was like unfolding during that.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. That was a fun one though. Anyway.
yeah. So maybe we'd talk a little bit about Macaroons today.
Oh yeah. Um, this was a blog post that was published yesterday. Yep. Let me see. I think I can share that real quick on my screen. Um, this blog post, and I haven't actually dug into it myself yet. So I'm very curious to hear about your reading of it.
Yeah, I read the whole post, which is now the sum total of my knowledge of this approach.
Yeah.
So I'll try and reiterate it a little, but it was very interesting. It went through some of the problems, the historical problems with bearer tokens, some of the approaches that have been suggested to try and deal with those, like POP and DPOP. Uh, the history of OAuth 1 and trying to sign tokens, and the challenges and problems with that. And then it went into this idea of this notion that you could have an access token, and it would be an encoded token like a JWT that was kind of the very coarse-grained controls that we're used to, things like scopes. But then you could use a library to get a new access token derived from that original one that had less authority. And in this world of Macaroons, they refer to that as caveats. So you add caveats to an access token that always reduce the level of access that it has. So you might have this initial access token that has a bunch of scopes, and then you call this library function that returns a new token that has less scopes in it. And then that's the only thing that ever hits your resource server. So you don't
So
actually use, yeah.
I have a question. So this is a pretty standard mechanism we talk about in the OAuth world already of um, requesting as little privilege as you can in order to do these operations. In the OAuth world, though, you're always negotiating with the OAuth server to get these access tokens. So you might have an existing access token or a refresh token and then use the refresh token to get a downscoped access token for a particular operation. Is this,
Right.
are you saying that this does it without going online? Like it's using cryptography to do this?
That's where it might get a little murky for me. It's the authorization server that issues the access token like normal. Now, when you call this function that returns a new lesser privilege token, I don't know if it's hitting the authorization server again or if it's like built into this, Macaroon facility that it does it all locally. But
Okay.
the idea is that you now have, this new token that you derived from the original token may have like a 5-second expiration, and you have to kind of use it or lose it. And the resource server knows how to verify that token. Um, but there's somehow, which I don't fully understand, there's a reduced risk to leaking the original access token because it can't be used directly against an against a resource server anyway. Only these like derived tokens can even be used with your resource servers. And kind
Interesting.
of like Depop, there's some way that I don't fully understand also to verify these macaroons to get like proof of possession out of them. So I was thinking, it might be the kind of thing that just between the client and the resource server you could cobble together, but it looks like the authorization server has to support this feature in some way. And whose was it? ForgeRock? Is that what we're talking about? Yeah, ForgeRock has support for this, so it's something I'm definitely gonna play around with. But the whole point, the whole thrust of the post here is that it avoids the complexity and difficulty of um, signing requests OAuth 1 style, but gives you the
Mhm.
benefit of being able to derive these very transient tokens for very targeted uses.
Interesting. It must be doing it client side, right? If it's going to take a token and then create a new token signed, um, which then turns into a key management problem. But I could see like the client creating a new token using a a secret that it has in order to avoid ever having to send that secret, right?
Yeah, and
Which is effectively what.
in their example, like their overview steps, way toward the bottom, they talk about like you derive this token locally, but the resource server still introspects the token. So the authorization server still has a way of validating that the operation or letting you know like what that token represents. So it looks like the authorization server is still involved. I don't know if introspection at every step is a requirement or if that's just the example that they use. But there was a lot of introspection in their example, which, you know, on the one hand is kind of a step back, but in the context of being able to have these, like sub tokens, it's pretty interesting.
So it sounds like so where OAuth 1 sort of went sideways and everybody hated it was because um, so tokens were in two parts. There was a public and private or a key and secret or whatever you want to call it part of the token, and the secret that was what you got back from the authorization server. And then every API request you have to sign the entire request with that secret. And that signing algorithm was a nightmare because it involved like sorting your post parameters alphabetically to come up with a canonical
Right.
body to sign, which is like, okay. And then like good luck translating that to if you're posting JSON, right? Like then it's just a whole you have to make up something new. Um,
Right.
but yeah, it was a mess, so everybody hated it. But what it meant is that you were never actually sending something over the wire that could be stolen, which is the good part, right? So that's what we're trying to protect against. And the problem with bearer tokens is that you are sending the thing over the wire where if it is stolen, then that can be used. So if we're trying to get back to this proof of possession concept some way, there's already been several attempts, whether that's mutual TLS or Depop. It sounds like this is a new way of doing it, where instead of signing the entire like request body, you sign effectively a much smaller part of the request that is telling the server what you're doing, right? So you're signing a request to a specific audience for a smaller scope. And if you sign that request or that data, then it's no longer like replayable because it expires so quick and it can't be there isn't any secret data in that because it's signed and you're never sending the secret, which is a pretty cool idea. Um, yeah, and as I'm reading through this now, it that introspection point is interesting. I can't tell if that is um, like you said, I can't tell if it's a requirement or just sort of the easy way to do it. The downside of
Right.
the resource server introspecting means it has to go over the network to look up token or to validate the token, right? And while that's definitely the stronger way to do it because you'll always get the right answer, it is slower because it goes over the network. Um, so I would hope that there is a possibility of the resource server also looking at the signature of that token itself and being able to verify it itself without going over the
Right.
network. Um, but either way, yeah, it's a cool idea. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Did you
Yeah.
get the sense about whether this is any sort of on any sort of standards track? Like I know Macaroons are a Google thing again. I don't know what their status is in terms of does anybody else support them? Are they trying to bring into the IETF? Like where does this sit on the
It's a good
standards world?
question. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly where it stands. There's a whole bunch of posts and background that you can find at Google, but I don't know where it stands in the security world. It's been around apparently since like 2014.
Hmm. And then the other question is if this blog post was talking about ForgeRock's support for Macaroons, is that something that they just went and did on their own, or is that something they expect other people to add support for as well? Because that's definitely like a breaking change to OAuth, right? Like
Right.
traditional OAuth clients have to add support for this to sort of generate these custom tokens. But I could see this becoming a standard if this is a good approach, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to play around with it. Maybe for the next OAuth happy hour, I'll have played with ForgeRock's implementation, have some more, like we can do a follow-up.
Yeah, yeah. That'd be cool. See if we can see what it takes to actually add this in. I'm also curious if it can be added into a somehow added into a resource server where the OAuth server doesn't necessarily know about them yet, right?
Right.
Um,
I mean, that was
Kind of
my
like how,
original thought. Yeah.
yeah, because like I wrote a proxy server for the device flow so that you can actually use the OAuth device flow even if your OAuth server doesn't support the device flow, right?
Right.
Because Okta doesn't support the device flow natively yet. Very few authorization servers actually do. Um,
Right.
but you can spin it up this little thing on the side and do the device flow in that proxy bit, just having it redirect out to the real OAuth server for the actual authentication step. So I'm wondering if there's a way to do that here as well, because then we could add that to any OAuth server.
Yeah. Definitely worth looking into.
Yeah.
So in our remaining minutes, is there anything that you know of that's happening in the next 2 weeks that people who are interested should pay attention to? Any meetings or any
Yeah. Well,
relevant workshops?
there's always two good places to check. There's events.oauth.net and octadev.events. So there's actually two OAuth working group meetings coming up. We're doing interim meetings instead of meeting at the IETF week. So Monday is OAuth 2.1. Now that it's officially adopted, I guess we'll be presenting the status of that to the group, seeing what the next steps are. And then the week after on Monday is a meeting about PAR, pushed authorization requests, which is another great, I realize I should have been sharing my screen. PAR is another great extension, which I'm excited about. So that's coming up as well. Again, these are open meetings. If you want to attend, like you just have to go through the registration process of signing up on IETF, but there's no fee to attend these.
And both of them have both of these sites have nice little add to calendar links on them for
Exactly.
people that
Yep. There it
don't
is.
know. Yeah.
And then Okta Dev events. We are here today, and I don't have any public workshops coming up again till September, but I'm doing 2 rounds of a 2-part series. So these are the OAuth and OpenID Connect intro overviews. So part 1 here is going to be talking about intro to OAuth, and part 2 is then doing a deeper dive of actually doing some live coding and talking about API security and things like that. So these are also both free, so feel free to attend, sign up for these. We will be doing, I believe we're doing a giveaway for those, so a raffle. So if you are interested, feel free to join those. And
Neat.
yeah, that's what's come up for me.
Very good.
Well, cool. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in today. If you do have any questions about OAuth, feel free to leave them in the comments. We hang out on the YouTube comments, so happy to keep answering questions there. Or if we don't answer in a comment, we will bring those up during the next live stream as well. Yeah,
All right.
thanks
Well,
for
thanks for
joining.
joining, everybody.
Have a good rest of the week.